We've passed the midpoint in Florida's annual legislative session. And, like last year, the chambers are far apart on the budget and other issues. Gina Jordan is joined by WFSU reporter Tristan Wood and WUSF reporter Douglas Soule to talk about some of the big stories that have come out of the session so far.
So what are the odds, you guys, that this legislative session is going to drag on like last year?
A very good question, because I have Vegas plans.
Yeah, I have a vacation planned for the week after session's supposed to end, so I hope.
So we have to convince these guys to be done by March 13th, and all they really have to do is the budget, but we know how that goes.
Yeah, there's only one thing they have to do per the Constitution, and that is get the budget done. Last year, they extended session a month and a half to do that.
I think reading the tea leaves and stuff, but I could expect it to go longer again this year. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, luckily for us, though, they usually do take like a week break after the scheduled time, because we're not the only ones that book vacations. But that doesn't mean that it won't extend like a lot past its scheduled time again this year.
Obviously, the hope for everyone is that that does not occur, because we also have special sessions coming.
Right. Okay. Well, we have to unpack all of this. First of all, I want to talk about when they rolled out the budget. That was weird because the Senate said we're going to be respectful and wait for the House because the House is hosting the budget this year. Then the House suddenly rolled out the budget. What was happening there?
It's hard to say for sure what was going on behind the scenes, but I think it's really emblematic of the divide between the House and the Senate. It's not a good indicator of efficient communication between the chambers. It's not a good indicator of the session getting done by mid-March. Of course, it could. We do not know. But it was certainly a little confounding, and it's going to be interesting to see how the dynamic between the chambers unrolls from here.
Especially now, like when you see what they actually did roll out. I mean, they're still around $2 billion apart. There's going to be a lot of tense negotiations. And if, at this early onset, they're already not on the same page about when they're going to roll it out, and their communication on doing that, it's not working. I mean, it could be definitely a sign of further tense negotiations to come.
Yeah. A couple of big things with the budget. First of all, we've been talking about this Florida DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. Those activities are under the control of the CFO right now?
Well, from my understanding, the CFO is doing it, but one of the things that I was watching when I saw, these budget rollouts is that the House wants to kind of like reconstitute and give power back to like a Florida Auditor General, which would be under the control of the House and the Senate. And when I was reading through that job's responsibilities, it's like auditing and having access to local governments, being accountable to the House Speaker and Senate President, not being an elected position. Because kind of what you've seen happen with this Florida DOGE thing is that CFO Blaise Ngole, who is appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis, he was never elected to Florida CFO, and now he's running to be elected for the first time. So as he's been going around the state doing these audits, the events have seemed to kind of double as kind of like a campaign appearance. He's calling out Democrat-controlled, cities and counties, pointing a finger at them for audits, banging the drums about culture war issues. However, it seems like the House wants to rein in a lot of that responsibility in auditing under the realm of the legislative branch. It would make sense that the audit of it would fall under the purview of the legislature to be able to make sure that, the money it's allocating is being spent correctly.
Another interesting component of all this. Oh, I thought you were looking behind me. Sorry.
No. I was looking at myself. I apologize.
He does that all the time.
It was a great reflection, Tristan. I would too. I would too. I think cool shirt, cool hair. You've got it all over there. Anyway, back to what I was saying. It's also interesting with Florida DOGE because I've heard some Republicans in the House and a whole lot of Democrats talk about this focus on local governments and wish that that focus was also brought toward the state government. So they point out, putting these local governments under the microscope, and they question some of the expenditures the state government, specifically the DeSantis administration, is doing.
Also, a biggie that both of you have covered is this emergency fund, which has now expired because the House and the Senate have disagreements over how that money should be spent. That is specifically money for the governor to use for emergencies, and that's what it's supposed to be, is for emergencies. Now, the House wants to stop this money from being used for immigration enforcement, which Governor DeSantis has been using it for. It's been funded since 2022 with close to $5 billion so far. And Senate Minority Leader Lori Berman is asking for more legislative oversight.
Over $500 million has been spent on immigration with no time frame on reimbursement from the federal government. $405 million was spent in the last 6 months, including $500,000 spent on private jets and thousands spent at restaurants. This fund is only controversial because of the way it has been used to enable a political state of emergency that has gone on for over 3 years.
And then you have a Democrat, Boca Raton Senator Tina Polsky, who voted in favor of this previously, and now she is saying that this fund needs to expire.
I'm so disappointed in this chamber. We have the opportunity to fix something that isn't working as well as it should have. In 2022, we voted for this fund for natural disasters because we knew that it was too hard to get the money. I remember we had to come back in a special session and get money for Hurricane Michael, and that's cumbersome, and we're not here all the time. So I understood, and I took the leap of faith and voted for it. But we've had 4 years to see what this has become, and we've had 4 years to see the abuse.
So Senate President Ben Albritton is saying, look, this fund is necessary. He has pushed off potential changes for a different batch of lawmakers in the future.
I also would believe that, the legislature of 2027-28, there's still ample time for them to have plenty of conversation about how this process is working and, what questions they may have. The goal is to get the trust fund reinstated so that we don't find ourselves in some kind of forced jeopardy in the future with, what may happen this summer.
So he wants to kick the can down the road. He's like, let's just let it be and somebody else can deal with it. Interesting, though, that the House and the Senate are just not in the same place right now with that and might not be.
No, nobody's on the same page with this. Governor Ron DeSantis wants $500 million for that fund. The House is saying $100 million, while the Senate is saying $250 million. I would say, though, the bigger divide between the chambers is the House wants to put guardrails on that money. They want to restrict that money to only natural disasters, and they want to add legislative oversight over it.
And it's interesting that this is going to be the final legislative session that Governor Ron DeSantis will be governor in Florida. So this session, the previous session, Albritton has been a lot less hesitant at taking an adversarial position against the governor, but Speaker Perez has been very aggressive in taking an adversarial position against the asks of Governor Ron DeSantis. So this is like a continuation of, kind of like the two chambers' stances. But I mean, also when you look at like wanting to rein in the funding, as Berman said, there's been a lot of like heavily questionable spending from these emergency funds under this immigration emergency declaration. Liv Caputo with the Florida Phoenix, she's done some great reporting on this. There was thousands of dollars spent at Liberty, the bar in Tallahassee.
Which is a good establishment to spend money at.
Very good, but I don't, it's not clear to me how thousands of dollars spent at a bar in Tallahassee has anything to do with dealing with an immigration emergency. So there's certainly been a lot of scrutiny about how that fund's being spent, and it seems like the House is trying to rein that in.
Yeah, and two things I want to point out also with this fund. Governor Ron DeSantis is term limited here soon, so a lot of the money they're talking about wouldn't necessarily even apply to him as governor. It would be whoever the next governor is.
Right.
Another thing is a lot of the money that the governor has spent out of this fund, he has claimed and promised would be reimbursed by the federal government. The federal government itself said yes, but there's been a lot of reporting creating doubts around that. So we don't even know if hundreds of millions of dollars out of that fund, which was supposed to be reimbursed by the federal government, will be now.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Artificial intelligence is a biggie, and we keep hearing about these data centers. So lawmakers are trying to address AI infrastructure, ethics. Tristan, what's the latest on these bills?
There's kind of like two separate legislative packages. This AI Bill of Rights, which would give various consumer protections for interacting with AI, prohibiting minors from having, unbridled access to AI platforms without their parents being able to monitor what they're doing. stuff like requiring people inform that they're interfacing and interacting with an artificial intelligence platform when they're doing so. So there couldn't be like a chat bot that's being passed off as a human without being notified that artificial intelligence is being used. That's kind of like the artificial intelligence Bill of Rights. Like there's a host of other things there. Now, there's also several bills related to data centers. One of them would make clear in statute that local governments have the right to, in their comprehensive plans, control the placement and basically regulate the use of data centers, and also require that costs for electricity for the placement of these large-scale data centers would have to be paid for upfront by these companies placing the data centers, dealing with a lot of the concerns around electricity use that's popped up nationally around these data centers. There is another bill, though, where it would essentially give a public records exemption for a set time period while plans for a data center are being negotiated or talked to with the local governments. It would allow, the documents that are being submitted for approval from these data center companies and stuff to be essentially public records exempt for months during the negotiation process. So some people have expressed concern that that would keep people from being able to know or look at the extent of a data center project that's being proposed. None of these proposals have passed the House and Senate. They're at various stages advancing in committee, but they are a hot button issue and of tremendous importance to Florida residents, but also for a lot of these very powerful businesses that are trying to lobby and change these bills. There are around 6 or 7 data center projects that are at various stages of proposal or an exploratory phase of coming to Florida. So data centers are looking to be a bit of an emerging industry in the state, and I don't expect that to change.
Yeah, I know, like you said, there's at least half a dozen around the state. Nothing proposed that I'm aware of anywhere close to Tallahassee, Leon County.
Yeah.
But it's hard to imagine one of those going in here, just knowing how much water and power they require.
Yes, with these data centers, they do target them to be in a little bit more rural or suburban areas away, like big population centers like cities, but they also have to be near powerful electrical grids to be able to sustain that level of. So when you look at where the projects are, generally being proposed, they're, around South Florida, Tampa region where there already are more expansive electrical grids than you see up here in Tallahassee.
Yeah. All right, let's shift to education and school vouchers. So Florida's Universal School Choice Program is pretty popular now. It's getting more and more popular. The per-pupil funding follows the student. So enrollment in traditional public schools is either flat or down just all over the state because families are choosing private schools or homeschool programs because they can use money from the state to pay for those. A recent state audit found trouble with how this money is being spent and tracked.
On any given day of the week, the Department of Education can't find 30,000 students we're paying for. That's $270 million we're paying for students we can't locate.
So the Senate quickly passed a bill sponsored by Pensacola Republican Senator Don Gates.
The Auditor General's report was tough medicine. But, Mr. President, to disregard the Auditor General's findings and warnings and recommendations and just let things roll on as they are would be legislative malpractice.
So, Douglas, you've covered this. What does this bill do?
This is a big, sprawling bill. A lot of pages to look through with this one. But also, we have a big, sprawling voucher system in the state of Florida. Billions of dollars every year involved. This bill, it creates tougher accountability standards with that money, including more strict student tracking measures. It also gives each student a unique ID to help with that tracking and requires more documentation for applicants. Overall, what listeners need to know is that it creates stricter accountability measures on this voucher program, which is just huge. And it's one praise from people who are pro vouchers, but also questions and concerns from public education advocates who are seeing billions of dollars being drawn out of the public education sector. Now, the big question with this, though, is the House going to play along? And we do not know. House Speaker Daniel Perez hasn't done media availability recently, so once he does, that'll be one of the first questions I ask.
Great. Okay. So the House passed a bill to eliminate the term West Bank. Tristan, I know you were on this. Lake Worth Democratic Representative Deborah Tendrich supported the move after the Jordanian government came up with that moniker.
By replacing Judea and Samaria with the term West Bank, the land was stripped of the Jewish identity and reframed as merely a geographic description.
But Jacksonville Democratic Representative Angie Nixon, not on the same page here. She didn't like the idea of changing the name of something so well known.
Change the West Bank to Judea and Samaria, even though the majority of the world recognizes it as the West Bank, even though Donald Trump literally called it the West Bank this past week.
Why do we have this bill?
So it's a part of a larger national and international debate around the use of these two terms. West Bank is what's usually used by the international community, by the UN and international documents. It's also used by like countries and groups that are largely pro-Palestinian. This Judea and Samaria term, it's the term used by the Israeli government, many pro-Israeli activists and groups, and some Jewish people. The reason it's such a sticking point is because the land of Judea and Samaria is larger geographically than the West Bank. It takes up other territories, and you had tons of Muslim and other pro-Palestinian groups come during committee to express concern about the use of that language and expressing concern that it's an erasure of their identity. This is definitely an issue, especially in Florida with such a large Jewish community, and it's a cultural touch point. Florida's government as a whole has staunchly identified itself as an ally of Israel, and several of these committee stops were happening during Israel support weeks that the legislature was holding, where they were having representatives from Israel's government come and interact and talk with lawmakers. So this bill can be viewed as, just another example of how the state of Florida and the Florida legislature is looking to identify itself more with the Israeli government and represent itself as staunch allies of Israel.
Yeah. You guys have both covered DEI initiatives. We have a bill that would bar local governments from funding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs of any kind. Jacksonville Republican Representative Dean Black is one of the bill's sponsors.
If you hire the very best person for the job, there is no reason why you wouldn't have Black people and women and people of various nationalities represented there. And if you think otherwise, that is inherently racist itself.
That is not how St. Petersburg Democratic Representative Michelle Rayner sees it.
HB 1001 does not ban discrimination, it bans preventing discrimination. This bill tells local governments they are not allowed to identify inequities, they're not allowed to address barriers, not allowed to take proactive steps to ensure fair workplaces.
So we have supporters saying this will help get rid of discrimination. We have opponents saying, how in the world is this going to help? This is going to make discrimination worse. What have you guys seen in covering this bill, and do you think it has a chance to get through the full legislature?
So essentially with this bill, it does a couple things. So it removes diversity, equity, and inclusion offices from local governments, essentially saying they can't have them anymore. That's something that's already been done in the state at the higher education level through previous laws passed in previous sessions. So this is not a new concept from the Florida legislature. What those offices generally do is they do diversity trainings, but they also manage and observe employment statistics within local governments to make sure that they have a diverse workplace. One of the arguments from supporters of the bill was that, if people feel like they're being discriminated against, they could still do a lawsuit because racial and gender discrimination is still illegal, but there wouldn't be a dedicated office to make sure that that's not happening before a lawsuit. Additionally, the bill also bans funding for diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives or events. Municipalities might have pride celebrations for the LGBTQ plus community, and several municipalities around the state sometimes sponsor those events. Local governments will not be able to spend money on that anymore.
And isn't there a provision about people being able to sue if they see something like that?
Yes, if they do so, they will be able to sue the local governments to get money back. So there is an enforcement mechanism to make sure, not just saying, you can't do this with no enforcement. That's kind of the enforcement mechanism. No one's going to go to jail over it, but it will open up lawsuits and financial damages for a city if they choose to do so. As far as whether it's going to pass, I mean, it seems like it is going to, just because it's not out of lockstep with stuff that the legislature passed in previous years. It's just taking it to a new domain, local governments.
Yeah. A story I think all of us have covered is the granny flats. We've talked about these accessory dwelling units, ADUs. So the granny flats bill did pass the Senate. It says that municipalities must allow these additional dwellings on certain kinds of property, like single-family lots. Pensacola Republican Senator Don Gates, he wields a lot of power, former Senate president. He says his bill can help address Florida's affordable housing problem.
ADUs can increase workforce housing. Because ADUs cost less to build, they cost less to rent, and are often located in areas where workers need to live to be close to their jobs.
I mean, it sounds reasonable. What are the problems?
It's something that's been like universally largely praised, I would say. One concern with them, though, is it would increase density in single-family home zoned areas. So it allows the smaller single-person units to be built in like the backyard or front yard or wherever of a single-family home lot. Essentially, what that offers is it gives, oftentimes cheaper housing in a city area that's already largely developed, but it also offers them a way to like supplement their mortgage or other expenses by being able to charge rent on their property without having someone necessarily living inside their home. If all of these pop up in certain areas and the streets and parking infrastructure for these neighborhoods is designed for single-family homes, how does that change that? But ADU policy has already been very popular around the state. Gainesville, Tallahassee, Tampa, they've all already passed ordinances to allow ADUs. So this is just kind of making it viable across the state, something that's already been growingly popular, especially in a state where housing costs and rent costs, home prices has skyrocketed over the last 5 years. This is just like one of the many pieces of the puzzle that the legislature is trying to move on to help stem that a little bit and give people options.
Yeah, and it's one of the more bipartisan bills of the session, I would say, due to its affordability focus. Now, one other issue that I've been hearing is this concern about it leading to more Airbnb, vacation rental situations, which have had problematic occurrences in some communities across the state. But this is legislation that is moving through the process. Will it reach the finish line? It's looking good right now, but also the question is does Governor Ron DeSantis support it? I don't know if he's actually been asked that question at a press conference, but that will be a wait and see, and obviously big implications for communities. The legislature has passed a lot of preemption bills where they dictate how local governments run their governments and their communities. This would essentially be another one of those.
Outside this ADU bill, as Florida's kind of facing a housing crisis, it seems like the legislature is putting forward a couple different bills that would essentially take away some local control to kind of ramp up the housing stock that's available. And that kind of makes sense because when they rolled out their Live Local Act a couple years ago, there was a lag of a lot of the cashing in on a lot of the tax breaks and stuff for developers because of resistance from local governments for the various comprehensive plan rules and other things that they had in place.
Resistance that continues to this day, including litigation. So
absolutely. So it seems like the legislature is interested a little bit in kickstarting more of that development because housing prices, they're not going down. So they're certainly working on increasing that housing supply, whether that means taking over some local control or not.
Yeah, and every year I would expect to see some version of an expansion on that Live Local Act. Certainly we're seeing several measures moving this year already.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap up by talking about the special sessions that are already in the works. Do we have one officially called or two officially called?
Just one officially called, and that's the one on redistricting in April. The governor has floated a special session on the property tax reduction idea as well. Initially, when DeSantis had said that, some in the House were like, no, we want to do it during the session itself. And the House has certainly been pushing forward various measures that would in various ways address the property tax. But the Senate hasn't pushed any bill. But we still have a month left, so a lot can change. And maybe they do make a move on it. But Right now, Senate President Albritton is being very, every time he's done a press availability, he's asked about this, and he says, we're still working through it in the Senate. We're still working through it in the Senate. We're measuring. And that's been the case up to this point. Will it continue into the spring? And will it continue in a way that needs a special session? We shall see.
I would say almost certainly yes, if I was reading the tea leaves. But, there are several different proposals that the House has put out. So, it's going to be interesting to see what DeSantis actually wants and what it actually looks like. He's been very vocal about it, and he's floated ideas about using state funds to make up money in rural areas while they're trying to cut the budget this year because of decreased revenues. So it'd be interesting to see if a special session comes and DeSantis pushes forward a plan, what it actually looks like, because there hasn't been a lot of details from him about what the actual mechanics will be.
Yeah, he's been very vocal about wanting a reduction, but not vivid in the plan. We haven't seen a specific proposal from him, nor have we seen one from the Senate. But DeSantis also emphasizes that he would like, and the other legislative leaders have also said this, that they want only one proposal to make the ballot this November. So we're really far from the conclusion point of this property tax debate, but it's one that's enormously important. We're talking about, one, just from the perspective of you could have a reduction in tax. Everyone cares about that. But also importantly, local governments are incredibly concerned because a lot of their local services are funded by that property tax. So if this does pass, and depending on what fashion and form it takes, you could see a reduction in services that residents also care a lot about.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. WSF's Douglas Soule, part of your Florida team. WFSU's Tristan Wood. We have another month or so. Thank you guys for your reporting.
We do. Thank
you
for having
so
me.
much.